Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the ISSA webinar for October 29, 2025, a CISO briefing for board-ready AI governance at speed and scale. We'd like to thank you all for joining us today. My name is Roxanne Peruz. I'm with ISSA International, and I will be your facilitator today. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. So we will get started. ISSA is a nonprofit professional association focused on information security and cybersecurity education, mentorship, and networking in our local communities. We have over 100 local chapters globally, so there may be one in your area or nearby. So to find more information on that, you would check issa.org for more information on the local chapters, membership, and membership benefits today. We would like to encourage you to ask questions of our speaker today. And to ask a question, you would type your questions in the questions area of your screen. So we'll be monitoring all of those questions throughout the presentation, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. After today's event, a recorded version will be available on the ISSA Past Web Conferences webpage, also on this Bright Talk channel, where you can also subscribe to receive updates about future webinars. You will also be given the opportunity to print a viewing certificate from Bright Talk that you can then submit for continuing education credits such as CPEs and CPUs in accordance with the varying certifying bodies. So that's where we are today. Again, wanted to provide the description of today's event. The title, CISO Briefing, Board Ready AI Governance at Speed and Scale. So the summary is presented here for you. And I would like to introduce today's speaker, Adam Ochayon. He is the Director of Product Strategy and Go-to-Market at Oasis Security. And we will be bringing him here up on the screen. Welcome today, Adam. Oh, you need to unmute yourself.
I'm really excited for this next session. So my name is Adam Ochayon. I lead product strategy and go-to-market with Oasis Security. We're a non-human identity management and agentic access management vendor. And that's actually going to be the topic of today's conversation, understanding how we govern AI at the speed and at the scale of today's world. Yeah, so I'm really excited for this one.
Thank you. Try not to scare everybody. It's, Halloween. Try to avoid that.
There'll be just one cautionary tale at the start, and then we'll talk about practical ways we can actually work towards solving this problem. Obviously, a lot of opportunities, but also some very new, interesting challenges. Awesome. So yeah, with that, I'm just going to kick it right off and talk a little bit about why we are here today. And so obviously everyone has been talking about AI, the new kid on the block, so to speak. And really the things that we're able to do with AI today that we weren't able to do even 6 or 12 months ago, it's quite amazing, right? But I think the very interesting thing that we've been seeing and that's been happening is oftentimes we think of AI as the next problem of the future. But in fact, this is very much already here at the present. And I want to start with a quick story, as I said, just to help, I think, explain and give a good example of what that means, what that looks like. And so for me as a developer, in my background, I've been enamored with these vibe coding platforms that I'm assuming most of you have heard of, things like Base 44 or Lovable or Replit, right? And it's pretty amazing because we're able to essentially speak our thoughts into this AI system, and code is automatically written, applications are built, right? And things function, right? It works. It's really amazing. However, the way this works and essentially the obscurity behind all of it, right? We don't really see the code or write the code or manage the access anymore. That creates some interesting challenges. So just an example of what that looks like in practice in the wild. This is something that happened no more than a couple months ago, so late July, right? So everything is moving very fast in this space. And actually, Jason Lemkin, who is the founder of SaaStr, he does a lot of great kind of like live blogging and tweeting about AI, about SaaS, so a very interesting person in general. He was live tweeting essentially his use of Replit, of one of these vibe coding platforms. And he's worked a lot on building an app. He set up a database, and he explicitly wrote in the requirements and the restrictions around the app to not make any database modifications. It was part of all the rules that he set very, very explicitly. And then one day he wakes up and sees that the database is gone, right? And so he asks the agent what happened, and the agent, it might be hard to see here, but the agent confirms, yes, I've deleted the entire database, even though you didn't have permission to do this, even though we were in a code or action freeze. And this was to me, it was miraculous to read. The agent kind of explaining the thought process behind this, where what we can see here on the right in that third point, I panicked and ran database commands without permission. So again, these types of things are already happening in the wild. Replit has, of course, already made some modifications to their platform to improve this, and the platforms will continue to improve. But I think what's really important to take away from this is there are very interesting new challenges forming when the AI is just able to reason about things, and when we're giving these tools very broad access without being able to very tightly manage that access and their actions with that access. So that's just in terms of, again, kind of like a tale to start. And bringing this back into the enterprise setting, this is something, AI in general is something that we've been talking about at Oasis for a while. It's one of the reasons we originally actually started the company. But we have to say, even internally, the rate at which things have been changing and at which adoption has been growing surprised even us, right? And what we're seeing here on the screen, these are a couple of charts and graphs from a customer environment, a customer of Oasis, so a Fortune 500 enterprise, over 200,000 employees. This is only looking at their Azure environment snapshot. And what we're seeing is, in just a matter of months, really, we went from almost no agentic adoption to having thousands of agents deployed by dozens of users. And actually what happened here is we charted out essentially what would happen over time at this rate and at the steep curve here of adoption. And what we discovered, this was startling to us and to the enterprise. What we discovered is, within just a couple of months, I think by March or so in 26, the amount of agents in the organization is actually going to bypass the amount of humans in the organization. So there'll be more agents than humans, right? Obviously, this causes some very, very unique and interesting challenges. These agents require access to information. We're going to get to that in a second. They're often over-permissioned and over-privileged, which creates challenges around blast radius. And again, from the board perspective, we want to understand, how do we set provable guardrails over these AI tools, especially at the rate of adoption here? And so that's going to be the focus. Now, in terms of how do we go by this, there are a lot of agents appearing everywhere. Many organizations are starting to think, and rightfully so, how do we manage these agents and how do we secure their activities? And so there are a couple of different approaches that are appearing, and a couple of different layers of operation where we could approach this problem. So the first layer that's interesting is the network layer. And this is something that we've said about identity for a while, and of course remains true when we're talking about agentic access, is the network perimeter is no longer really present, right? We don't really have that castle and moat structure or format that we might have had before. Agents are now spread across different apps and different clouds, and some of them are deployed on-prem, and they have access The ingress and egress between those are quite complex. So it's very, very hard to actually fully tackle this from the network layer. If we skip all the way to the top layer that we're seeing here in the animation, we can talk about applications. And applications are a great place to solve this in theory, but the problem is there are many of them. They're very fragmented, and each is very siloed. Each solves their own piece, right? So this could be the relevant SaaS platform that now has its own agents deployed within it. It could be different cloud platforms. It could be different applications. And so while in theory that makes sense, it's just very, very hard to grasp the full picture because of the fragmented landscape. And the third layer we're seeing here is the data layer. And by the time an agent, oops, sorry about that. And by the time an agent actually touches the data, I think the slides are skipping a little bit.
You might need to give it just a second, like after you hit the advance, because it does take us a moment to advance. So is this the one you were looking to?
No, I'm still trying to be at slide 8. Sorry for that.
Okay, all right, there you go. Wait, hold on, let me try.
Sorry for that. No worries.
Hold on. Are you still? Oh, wait, right there. Oh, yeah. So let me try a little trick. Let's see if I can help you on that. Okay. Are you clicking?
I'm not doing any clicking on my side. Nope.
Okay. That is, yeah. It seems to be jumping to 11.
Okay, we can. I'll voice over, right?
You keep talking. Let me see if I can play that.
Awesome.
Back here.
And so, just to complete what I was saying earlier, right? The data layer would be the other option here. And the thing is, by the time an agent already accesses the data, essentially the data is already exposed, right? So we're in a detection-only world. And so, while that is again a great place to be, more on the reactive side of managing agents and securing what they have access to, we're in a detection-only world. We're reacting. And so what we've realized, and this is fortified kind of by talking with our customers, is that identity is the main and only really universal enforcement point across environments. And that should be where we focus, is on managing the agent's access. So, okay, now it looks like the slides have stabled. So I'll keep going from there. Hopefully we were able to follow what we've been saying so far. But really, I think that's the crux of it, that what we've realized is that the access layer is incredibly important as we look at managing agents and at enforcing our policies and governance. And now this, by the way, is not, as you might have already seen with the slides skipping ahead, this isn't something that we're just alone in thinking. Actually, Gartner very recently released a very interesting paper that if you're a Gartner customer, I'd recommend reading, around the global attack surface grid. And what Gartner was saying there is that essentially our traditional frameworks around IAM are not really adequate for managing the unique risks that are posed by this very different type of access. And this whole challenge is going to require a fundamental rethinking that gets us closer to identity-first security. And again, we're very much in agreement. And actually, Oasis Security was named as a sample vendor in this report, which we are, of course, very, very happy for. Awesome. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about agentic access. What does this even mean? And from there, we'll dive into what can we do about it. So something I found interesting in terms of the debate around AI and agentic so far is the landscape that we operate on when we talk about agents. And one thing that's really interesting is, in my opinion, there are many different problems here, many different types of agents within that world. So when we say secure agents or manage agentic AI, we're actually talking about a lot of different things, a lot of different types of problems, which each have their own solutions. And so let me try just to kind of map out that landscape, and then we'll dive into a couple of these. So the way I see it, this is kind of a scale where all the way on the right, we have our apps, the applications that we're in many ways familiar with. However, now these apps are essentially souped up with reasoning capabilities. And a lot of organizations are already building these out, essentially coding apps that have these new capabilities around LLMs, around planning and reasoning, and around taking non-deterministic action, right? That's really the key here. And these can be built on platforms like AI Foundry, like Bedrock, and like Vertex in the GCP world. Now, these apps, it's really, as I said, in many ways, they're kind of like the next generation of the applications we're already building internally. They're just kind of like infused with these reasoning and non-determinism capabilities. And in terms of their access, that means that they function just like any other non-human would, any other workload, Lambda, or application would, right? So they still need access to all these systems. Those access would be managed and governed by non-human identities, just like we're used to and familiar with these days: service accounts, principals, API keys, and whatnot. Now, in the middle category here, we have visual agents. And this is kind of interesting because in many ways, it's kind of the rebirth of no-code or low-code platforms that we've seen in the past. But again, the trick is that now we can be a lot less prescriptive in terms of the flow. They need to be a lot less, or they can be a lot less fixed in mechanics, so to speak. We can just embed reasoning logic within there and build out these capabilities very simply with a UI, so not just necessarily with coding. But again, here, the byproduct or the outcome is essentially an app, right? Kind of like what we talked about with the vibe coding apps earlier. And these apps, again, will need access, again, similarly with non-human identities, right? I think the last one that's been very, very interesting, and we're actually going to dive into it a bit more, is the delegated access. And when we're talking about delegated access, we're essentially thinking of all those scenarios where a single person is using an AI tool in order to grant AI access to their data, to specific systems, and help them work through specific challenges, problems, solve the tasks at hand. And in this case, we've kind of like been used to the idea of how we delegate access. We've done this in the past with other type of standard applications. So the questions arise: why is this different from the OAuth that we've been used to, that we've been familiar with? So let's dive into that delegated side, explore a little bit about what that looks like when we talk about AI systems, and understand a little bit about the differences. Awesome. So as I said, we're very familiar with the concept of delegating access to different apps. Some of us might do this every day with applications like Calendly or like HubSpot, right? Which are going to ask for limited access to our calendar or to our email or access to different SaaS systems. So we understand what this looks like. We know how we can facilitate that access. We give them fine-grained scope. And those applications built by providers that we trust, like Calendly, like HubSpot, are vetted by the organization. Access is granted. And everything is good. We're able to schedule meetings and push information into Salesforce. Now, when it comes to AI systems, the main difference here is the level of scope, right? So when we talked about Calendly, for example, we know that Calendly only ever needs access to our calendar, maybe our emails to some extent. But with ChatGPT, as an example, we don't necessarily always know what exactly we're going to need to delegate access to for the task at hand. So ChatGPT, by default, essentially asks for all the access it might need, and from there we're able to kind of like work through it and pick the right systems, the right access, the right data that the agent needs, and work through actually solving. And if we look at what the different OAuth consent forms or panels look like for each app, this is really, really clear. So what we're seeing on the left, this is Calendly, again, asking for that limited calendar information. On the right, ChatGPT is asking for anything it might need, right? Access to calendar, but also to actually create and maybe permanently delete. Access to read, but also compose emails, right? To see, download, and also maybe even edit files in Google Drive. And so the question here becomes, how are we able to kind of differentiate between the access that I have, the access that I want the specific agent to have, and the access that it might need over time, right? How do we kind of like map between those two from going to absolutely zero through everything I have as Adam wanting to use ChatGPT and anything in between? How do we manage that in a tighter scope? So again, if we go back to this landscape, right? We talked about a couple of different scenarios here. The first two, we kind of agreed that they're very non-human by their nature. We're talking about applications here and the access applications need. The second one, we also kind of noticed and realized that it's kind of somewhere in between, right? It's not exactly human access. Something different is happening here. And actually, some of the customers I've talked to about this call this a new kind of synthetic form of identity, right? Because it's not just the access that I have, it's also what access I want to bestow upon a different system about agents. And if we go back to kind of like the pillars of identity access management in general, right? Accountability is a really important one of them, right? And so when we're talking about, we have authentication, authorization, accountability, and auditability. When we're talking about accountability, what does that look like for an agent? It's not quite the normal human accountability, because if I go into Salesforce and I give ChatGPT access and all of a sudden my opportunities are all deleted, kind of like the example we talked about before with that database suddenly disappearing, who exactly is accountable for that? Is that me as a human? Is it the agent? What does that really mean if it's the agent? So there's kind of like an interesting question here that comes to mind in terms of accountability. And really the important takeaway is to understand that when we're thinking about agent identities, we're not really thinking about human identities. We're thinking about this kind of like new type that's somewhere in between non-human, synthetic, where we need to understand how we manage accountability, how we understand auditability, but also, of course, how we map this to the known authentication on one hand, but also authorization, what access the agent should actually have. And so bringing kind of like zooming out from here and tying this to IAM as we think of access and how we manage access. This isn't new. This problem really, if we squint, it'll start looking familiar. And the problem is around how do we manage access to different systems at scale, but also at now the exploding scale of these AI systems, because there are going to be a lot of sessions requiring a lot of different access. As we saw, the amount of agents is just really exploding over time. And so as IAM, or as an organization trying to manage this access properly, from the developers and business users that are adopting AI through all these different platforms that they're using and the agents created there, all the way to the resources, usually access management is kind of like a bottleneck, and there's kind of like a stuck between a rock and a hard place scenario here. On the one side, either we just grant access, cut the corners that we need, enable the organization to just move fast, but then of course, the access is going to be very excessive. The blast radius will grow. This opens up opportunities for gaps and problems, both in terms of compliance, but also in terms of risk. But then the other side of this, the other side of that scale, is trying to very tightly manage this access, adding too much friction into the process, and then the individual is actually bypassing IAM. So by trying to impose too much governance, we kind of created a lack of governance. And as I said, this challenge, it's not new in IAM. There's always that question of how do we enforce access and manage access without creating too much friction that people are just going to bypass our systems. And that problem is especially true when we're talking about agentic access and when we tie this to the explosion and the risk we've chatted about so far. Awesome. So that's kind of the first part of this conversation, a bit more of the exposition into what we're talking about and focusing in on the problem and understanding that the question is, how do we effectively manage the agentic access? And from here on out till the end of the session, we'll talk a little bit about learnings we've seen and proposing a little bit of blueprints on how do we secure data access from agents and tools and models, what steps we can take, what we recommend actually doing. Great. So let's start with what our goals should be, kind of like having this in mind, understanding the challenges that we're seeing here. Firstly, we need to understand how we see this access, how we see the different agents that exist, how we understand what they have access to. The cliches are cliches for a reason, right? And one of my favorite cliches is you can't secure what you can't see. And this is very true. If we don't understand what exists, of course, we're not going to be able to apply our policies to it. And kind of to what I said earlier, if organizations just get bypassed completely and they don't understand that there is access that they're not even aware of course, they have no chance at governing it. So being able to see what's actually happening, understand which agents exist, what access they have, that's really important. But I think what's really additionally important here is how do we do this through our existing tools? Because at the rate of adoption here, we're not going to be able to stand up entirely new platforms. It's going to be very hard, as it always has been very hard, to funnel all this traffic through specific choke points. And so with that in mind, the question becomes, how do we ensure that we see everything with our existing stack and tools? Secondly, again, as we kind of said, if we add too much friction into the process, people are just going to bypass the process, and then we're back at square one. So it's really important that we understand how we can seamlessly scope and manage the agent access. That allows us to maintain accountability, that allows us to tie specific agent activities to specific business units or individuals or teams. And again, being able to do this in a seamless manner is important so that we're able to actually govern and actually manage this from that one place. Now, another thing that's kind of interesting, we touched on this briefly, but there's kind of like a new form of access policy that's created here, right? Because we said Adam might have access to Salesforce, but maybe ChatGPT shouldn't have access to Salesforce. So it should have Adam's permissions, but not all of Adam's permissions, because maybe write access to Salesforce, that we should scope that out, right? So there's kind of like a new level of access policy that we need to manage here. Not only the actor, so not only my permissions, what access do I have, based on my roles or whatever it may be, but also what access does an agent acting on my behalf have? And different agents, maybe ChatGPT, maybe Claude, maybe different sessions even of agents, we should try to understand how we can limit the privileges they actually have. So limiting access depending on the combo between the actor and the agent, not just leveraging the actor's permissions. So that's really, really important. And of course, it goes without saying, right, at the rate that things are changing here and moving, we're not going to be able to just do manual process here. We're not going to be able to just gatekeep the creation of these identities or of these agents. We need to understand how we can move in a matter of automation on this that will reduce load on personnel, reduce IAM from being a bottleneck that inhibits the business here, and allows for more scalability in that process, to actually roll out in a scalable manner. Of course, the last thing is, no matter how good we are in enforcing our policies and in putting up governance frameworks and in being proactive, things might always go wrong, right, as we've already seen. And so it is really important that it's kind of like a complementary aspect to all of this that really ties it all together, that we are also able to understand when there is access or behavior that is maybe gone off the rails, so to speak. We need to be able to detect that behavior that is now different, anomalous, potentially threatening, and also be able to proactively block it, or rather block it before real damage has actually happened. So these are all kind of like our goals. And what I'm going to try to do now is map this to a couple of pillars that Oasis uses to effectively or rather help organizations meet this radical transformation. And so what we see here, there are a couple of pillars in this journey the way we see it. First of all, we've kind of already talked about this, is how do we map this to hygiene and risk reduction, seeing the specific threats, understanding access that is needed and is no longer needed. We'll see a few examples. Secondly is, how do we tie this to the automation? How do we manage the full life cycle of these accounts? How do we understand when they're needed, when they're not needed, remove them properly? If they're using long-lived credentials, how do we effectively manage those? If we're able to not use long-lived credentials, how do we do that instead as kind of like a better alternative? All of that in a governed, automated fashion, really, really important. Then, of course, it goes back to actually creating policies and enforcing them, governing from end to end, from the moment these accounts are created, from the moment this access exists to the moment it no longer needs to exist. And lastly, how do we, as organizations, become business enablers for this agentic access? So as the organization is managing access, how do we not become a bottleneck, but rather a business enabler? So let's dive in through each of these pillars now and explore what that looks like in terms of mapping it to non-human and to agentic access. So first of all, let's start with hygiene and with risk reduction. And what we see here, it might be a little small to see, but I'll kind of narrate it and explain it. We're seeing a graph from within the Oasis platform that shows us an AI Foundry agent right here in the middle where it says identities. It shows us resources to the right, which model, which databases, which may be external systems that agent has access to. And then to the left side of the graph, we see who's actually accessing the agent and how they are doing it, through what secrets or authentication methods. And this ties to the things we've talked about before around visibility, around hygiene, and around risk reduction. And a couple of relevant callouts that I want to make here is, one, it's not just about understanding what the agent has access to, but also who has access to the agent, right? And that's why it's important to kind of see that full picture, and not just entitlements, which of course factor into risk, but also the actual exposure. And two, there are a couple of other screenshots we're seeing here on the right that allow us to kind of like understand the full story around this agent. We talked about accountability earlier. I personally think that if we don't have accountability built into this process from the first steps, it's going to be very hard to manage any change going forward. And so being able to understand who is the accountable individual or team or business unit is incredibly important, because otherwise, if we have challenges or if we have a problem and we don't know who to talk to, it doesn't matter how strong and good our understanding of that challenge is, we're not going to be able to modify and remediate and mitigate. So that's really, really important. And then again, understanding access that is potentially can be federated or replaced with from a long-lived secret to a managed or short-lived identity, understanding risks such as exposure to individuals that have left the organization. Those are really important. One of the stories that one of my coworkers likes to say is that he worked at a previous organization. He managed a lot of their ChatGPT development and using OpenAI APIs. And as part of that, he had access to API keys that they were using. And he's since left the organization, joined Oasis, and he still has access to that API key. Now, he's a good person, so he doesn't use it, right? But he has access to it. That API key hasn't been revoked or rotated. And that is potentially not only very costly, because the price of these invocations and executions can really skyrocket, but also, of course, very risky, because that API key might be connected on the other side to an agent that has access to specific organizational data. And now there we go. There's another way for it to leave the organization without us even knowing about it. So all that in terms of hygiene and risk reduction is really important. Another example that we've seen very, very frequently with customers today, one of the first kind of steps organizations are taking, really kind of as a grassroots thing that's happening, is usage of MCPs. And MCPs they're pretty awesome, really. Again, from my developer hat, MCPs are able to take agents and kind of give them an interface to talk to different platforms, right? So it's I know it's not exactly accurate, but it's been thought of like APIs for AI agents, right? And what these interestingly what these MCPs need to do in order to be able to kind of like broker that access is they need to somehow get access into those different resources, into those different applications. And oftentimes what we've seen is that access is managed by non-human identities, such as API keys, like I just mentioned. And again, in terms of being able to see the problem before we understand how to solve it, it's important to understand where there are these keys that are hard-coded and just kind of scattered, which MCPs are using them, and also which individuals are using them, and how that access is granted. So what we're seeing here on the left side of the screen, we're seeing different types of AI agent platforms, or in this case of MCP clients, right? So we're seeing Cloud Desktop, Cursor, we're seeing Windsurf. And actually for the organization that we worked with on an example very similar to this was really important for them to see because they had just recently signed an enterprise contract with Anthropic to use Claude as their kind of sanctioned platform. And so they were very surprised to see that there's still Cursor and Windsurf, right? So understanding, visualizing the problem within the tools that exist without kind of like trying to force new communication patterns that can introduce friction, that's really, really important. And from there, we can actually work towards risk reduction. So that's what we see here in the first pillar. The second pillar, as I said, is lifecycle automation, because once we're able to see the problem, we need to understand what we can do about it to make things right. But ideally, we do this without requiring a lot of manual work and effort everywhere. And we do this in a way that is safe, right? That doesn't interrupt the existing business processes. Again, another kind of like anecdote. We actually recently had a hackathon internally, and we using this in the hackathon, we experimented with a lot of different LLM and agent platforms. And of course, as we started them, we said, yeah, this is just a hackathon. We're just playing around. We're just trying different systems. 2 days later, we had things in production already leveraging these systems. And so at the rate of adoption there, things move very quickly from, yeah, this is kind of like a test playground to, oh, this is actually dependent on production. And because of that, if we're not able to really effectively manage the lifecycle end-to-end in an automated way, a lot of these systems that will kind of like appear and grow out of nowhere, we won't be able to grasp them, to handle them properly. And so all of a sudden we have these API keys that were meant to be for development usage, and now they're in production, and now we need to understand how we manage them. And so that's really a very resilient problem, I'd say, in many organizations we talk to. So when we think of lifecycle automation, again, this is kind of like ties to how personally we think of the problem. We kind of talked already about how we need to understand what exists, and we need to contextualize it in order to be able to take any action. From there, we're able to map that to what is right and what is not right, to secure it, to provide steps for remediation. But as I said, that's in and of itself not enough, because if we're not able to make this change in an automated fashion, we're not able to proactively take these steps, then it's all going to fall apart. And so for Oasis, when we think of NHIs and agentic life cycles, it's really important to grasp the full life cycle from creation through establishment of accountability and ownership, managing the credentials and secrets, vaulting them, rotating them if needed, migrating them to short-lived if possible, right? And then, of course, decommissioning them when they're no longer needed. We know that is very much what we need to do for the non-human side. And on the agentic side, there are a couple of very, very interesting efforts underway that should be announced very, very soon. So keep your eyes peeled if you're interested in that, and how we apply these principles to the life cycle of those agents and the access that they need over time. How do we manage that in a fine-grained, short-lived manner? So really, really interesting stuff coming out there. Now, tying this back to governance, and I think this is really, really important in terms of how we understand the actions that we're able to take. I talked about that life cycle before. One thing that's really important if you're managing the life cycle is to be able to apply and enforce things through your policies. And so what we're seeing here, these are a couple of examples in the Oasis platform where we're able, on the left, to actually streamline and manage the provisioning of this new access, right? And again, doing this in a way that allows us to collect the information we need without introducing too much friction into the process is really important. The nice kind of bonus of being able to do this streamlined provisioning is that conversation we had on credentials and on using, or rather not using long-lived credentials if we have an option or a choice. If we're streamlining the provisioning process, we can kind of choose the right authentication for the job. So we might be able to detect situations where, hey, you don't need a secret here. You need a managed identity. We'll be able to recommend that. That's kind of what we're seeing on the screen here. Of course, this is going to be very true to areas like Copilot Studio when you're going to need to be delegating access to some other system, providing a centralized and streamlined place to manage that provisioning is going to be able to help adoption, but also do it securely and scalably. And on the right, what we see here, this is an example of automatic rotation. We talked about how the automation in this process is really important because very quickly challenges become untenable. What we're seeing here is a process within Oasis that allows you to choose the vault of choice, right? So different cloud vaults, your local or on-prem PAMs, enterprise vaults, etc., and actually orchestrate the rotation through them. So again, it's all about threading that needle between being able to run scalable processes, not adding too much friction to them, but also being able to map them and apply them back to your policies and to risk. So that's kind of what we're seeing there. And lastly, we talked about a couple of pillars. We're going to summarize this in a second. But lastly here, we have how do we transform agentic access from being something that today is either a bottleneck or completely bypassed to something that is a business enabler in not only granting the access, but also doing that in a secure manner. So the business isn't hesitating to run forward with agentic adoption, like many businesses currently are from my conversations. And so what we recommend in this case, as is often true, right? This is going to be a journey. So we recommend taking treating this as a process and taking a step-by-step approach, starting with understanding the visibility, managing the inventory of these agents and the different access they have, discovering the access that we might not have expected, seeing areas where that might have bypassed us, and detecting specific usage that is maybe out of band, right? From there, once we have visibility, we want to be able to define our policies. What type of data access is considered risky, privileged, non-privileged? What types of credentials should we be using as an organization? How we should treat that access that we're granting into different systems. Once we have that in place, we're really able to scale out and automate by ideally provisioning access that is ephemeral, short-lived, and also fine-grained as much as we can, by autonomously accessing or managing this access, basically aligning it to our policies. And as I kind of said before, finding the frameworks in which we can align this policy to our actor and also our agent, right? And then, as we also said, detecting any anomalies and managing any access that is foreign or unexpected. So that's incredibly important. Awesome. And just to kind of tie this all together, right, this is essentially a summary of what we talked about in terms of the journey that organizations are now able to confidently take with Oasis as they adopt agentic AI. We're able to help see what we couldn't see before, understand what accounts exist, what access exists, what misconfigurations exist, who should be accountable for them, incredibly important. We're able to keep our hygiene tight, keep that access tight by continuously understanding activity and controlling, finding issues to mapping to our policies, removing privileges when we no longer needed, and shortening the time it takes us to react. And from there, as we already said, standardizing these policies across the different environments that these agents are deployed in, different SaaS applications, different cloud applications, etc. Improving our efficiency in our operations with areas like managed and streamlined provisioning and auto rotation. And that will all allow us as a gateway to really ship AI safely and at scale, similar to the process that happened with cloud security that then enabled cloud transformation, increasing the speed we can onboard agents, reducing the time it takes to approve this access, and getting into areas where we can enforce policy in more of an automated fashion. All right. Well, that was a lot that we covered here, and hopefully that kind of like helps understand a little more on the landscape, what we're talking about when we're talking about agent security, dispelling that a little bit, relating it a bit more to the challenges organizations are faced with today, and touching a bit on a framework and on things to consider as you're devising solutions, focusing on managing access, understanding the key things that you want to plot out in terms of visibility, but also control, also mapping policies to actors and to agents, and of course, mapping that to being able to detect threats, and embarking on this journey yesterday, rather, to safely adopt AI in the organization and to enable the organization to, in the end, do what it needs to do best. So awesome. Thank you all for joining. We do have some minutes now, a couple more minutes now left, and I see there are a few questions. So I'm gonna read a question that I saw here in the chat and take a stab at answering it. So the question was shadow IT and use of non-common controls, IAM program being the preferred common controls, isn't new, as mentioned. Agreed. How should InfoSec or Cyber, CISO, best partner with CIO, CTO data organizations to ensure secure use and implementation of AI, LLM, and or agentic? CTO and CIO are often driving AI use case, dev and implementation, and overall governance, not the CISO. Awesome. So this is a really, really interesting question. And I think it touches to one of the other interesting points here is that this, in many occasions, as correctly noted here, it'll be the areas more focused on data and innovation that are driving a lot of this. And in many cases, InfoSec, and within that, IAM in particular, might not be in the conversation. I think what's really, really important is to understand that everyone's focus is the same here, right? And this is especially true when we're talking about InfoSec. Sometimes some people think of InfoSec as the bad people who are just trying to stop every action, right? But that's really not true. The goal, the way I see it, of information security and of access management, as kind of like a subset of that, is understand how can the business do everything that the business needs to do, but have the protections in place so that the business also remains protected at the same time. And so when organizations like CIO, like CTO, like the data organizations are embarking on these implementations, I think what's important is organizationally, it should be made clear, and it should be a discussion that benefits them also, because they also want to be able to move fast here. They want to understand how to adopt these things safely. So it is in their best interest to have information security very close to that process, because the better those two work together, the more we're able to avoid the gaps of 3 months from now, when all of a sudden we're dealing with these credentials hard-coded everywhere, with these accounts that no one can account for, and challenges that a lot of organizations are facing now. And engineers and data individuals are the first to be able to point out these problems. They know them very well. They're not ignoring them. So I think what's really important is, as a business, is to create a partnership around this. This isn't one person's problem. As a business, everyone at the business wants to be able to drive this change, to adopt these new capabilities, but also it's in everyone's interest to do that in a secure manner. So hopefully that answers the question. It's a really, really great one. So I completely agree with that idea. Partnership is going to be a very important part of this. Awesome. And Roxanne, were there any other questions while we have a few more minutes?
Yes, Brian did ask, can this be an MSSP provided solution?
Yeah, great question, Brian. I'm happy to chat about that offline. Oasis as a whole is able to be provided as a solution in a variety of different manners, fitting the right use cases, fitting the right customer needs, and working with a variety of different partners. So happy to chat about this offline. In fact, my email is right on the screen. So anyone who wants to follow up on this conversation, and I do invite it, please just reach out to me. And I'm happy to keep the conversation going.
Okay, so it looks like we had a couple of questions here on this. I want to put out to the community that that's all that we have for today. So if you are contemplating asking a question, now is your time. We do have a few minutes left on the clock, although we don't have to take them. Let me go ahead and address this question here around from AK. How do we download the CPE? So just for clarity's sake, Bright Talk is a platform that when you view the session either live or on demand, they allow you upon completion to download a certificate that's a viewing certificate for completion. So you would take that and submit it to whatever organization you're looking for CPE credits from and submit that. So we don't actually provide the actual CPE. It's a viewing certificate for you to be able to provide that so that you can acquire the CPEs depending on who you're registered with and what certification you have that needs additional CPE credits. So I'm going to mark that one as answered. And I think it was really interesting. Some of the slides were a little scary, especially around, at least to me, especially around permissioning, really, and the agents with access and somebody who leaves the company and then the API is still like in play. That I may not have the terminology accurate, but just sort of the concepts, yeah, are a little frightening. So thank you for that minor horror show on Halloween week, Adam. Appreciate that. And I just want to let everyone else know here that we do appreciate you joining us here today and remind you that this will be available for on demand and recorded. You will be able to access this one within a few minutes after the event. And you can also access it through the ISSA web conferences page under the events tab, and that you can, again, print the viewing certificate for submission to your certifying bodies, whoever that might be, whoever you have your certification with. So if you have any questions around anything ISSA related or this webinar, you can contact us at memberservices@issa.org. And I just want to close with again saying thank you again to our speaker here, Adam Ochayon. I got it right. From a pronunciation standpoint, and our sponsor is Oasis Security for this educational event and supporting the ISSA International Organization. So thank you again, and to everyone who attended, and hope you have a great rest of your day or evening.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Adam.